Hello. This is the second videotape presentation concerning the sound system of Modern Standard Chinese. This videotape is used for first-year Chinese classes at Harvard. The contents of this tape concerns the finals. You have perhaps already viewed the first videotape concerning initials. And now, in this tape, I will present to you the structure of the table of finals. Here on the board, I've laid out the table of finals. The basic elements of it are three types: medials, main vowels, and endings. Now, in a few minutes, we will use these basic elements, the medials, main vowels, and endings, to generate the whole chart of 36 finals. Or you could say that there are 37 finals if you consider one disputable case. Within these borders here, the two straight lines, we will write out the whole chart of finals. And the purpose of this tape is to show you the logic of the construction of this whole chart, and to emphasize the much more limited number of basic sounds within this chart that go to make up the whole table of finals. Now, the basic sounds are written out here already for you to see and to concentrate on. In the medials, there are four types. The first one is zero, that is, the medial doesn't exist. No need to spend any more time on that. The second one here is a sound of the first syllable in the English word even. Even. E. Please all repeat after me. The letter I sounds like E. E. This is made by raising the rear part of the tongue and relaxing the front of the tongue while you relax the lips. Sometimes the lips are drawn slightly to the side. E, E, E. In contrast to this is a sound written by the letter U. And the sound is the opposite of this sound in every way. The back of the tongue is relaxed and dropped in this case. And the lips, instead of being relaxed, are pushed forward and rounded. So you get a sound like ooh, ooh, ooh. This has a cavernous, deep, resonating quality because by dropping the back of the tongue and relaxing it, you form a large, resonating chamber in the rear of the mouth. Ooh. Please say after me. Ooh. Ooh. Once more now, contrast these two sounds. E. Ooh. E. Ooh. Going down, the last medial is written with the letter U and two dots above it. Now, in the German language, these two dots are used in spelling German, and the two dots are known in German by the technical name umlaut. U-M-L-A-U-T, umlaut. And I'll use that term in referring to it today. The U umlaut sign here, this letter U umlaut, is a sound, it represents a sound that does not exist in English. However, it's not difficult to learn because it's simply a combination of part of this sound, E, which I've already introduced to you, and another part of this sound, Oo. Although we write this U umlaut, basically it is really very much like the E up above. The only difference being that instead of the lips being drawn to the side, the lips are rounded when we say U umlaut. The interior of the mouth, the tongue position, remains the same for the U umlaut as it was for the letter I here, pronounced E. So, in preparing to say U umlaut, you can position your mouth to begin to say the word even in English. E. Now, before you begin the sound, simply do not move the tongue, but round the lips. E. And you get a sound. E. E. Now, if you listen closely, you'll realize that that sound is a combination of this sound and this sound. It's a combination of the E and the O. So let's review these. E, O, E, E. Now, in pairs, E, E, and this pair, O, E, O, E. By now you should be able to hear clearly the difference between the I in contrast to the U umlaut and the U in contrast to the U umlaut. And the distinction between these three medials is of paramount importance in your understanding and pronouncing modern Chinese. So be sure you practice it until you're very skillful at it. The second element is main vowels. And the main vowels are written out here. I'll have more to say about that in a moment. The third type of element in the finals are endings. Now, the endings are 5. 0, about which we don't need to say any more. The sound written with the letter I, which is exactly like the sound written with the letter I over here and will not need any further practice. A sound written alternately with either the letter O or the letter U, which is really just like this sound here that we've already practiced. So this ending, the either O or U, will not need any further practice in isolation. The two remaining endings that are new are N and NG. Now the N is slightly different from the English N. When. If you notice where your tongue is positioned at the end of saying the word W-H-E-N, when, you'll find that the tongue, if you pronounce it as I do, does not come so far forward as to touch the teeth. But in Chinese it does. If I say the word wen, perhaps you can see wen. That you can perhaps see slightly a bit of my tongue because the tip of the tongue is pushed quite forward so that it's resting against the back of the front teeth. And you want to be sure to practice that. NG presents no particular problems. It's very much like NG in English. And doesn't really need very much practice. So there are 3 medials and 5 endings, and of the endings, only one of them is really significantly different from English. Only requires significant practice. Now, the main vowels. The main vowels normally are positioned between the medials and the endings. First is this letter I with the cross, with the bar in crossing it. This sound, this symbol and the sound have been introduced in the first videotape. This is the vocalized extension of the dental sibilant row of initials. For example, ZI, or CI, or SI. And it is nothing more than a rumbling of the vocal cords when the tongue is in the position for pronouncing the dental sibilant initials. Later on, we will remove this bar. When you start writing pinyin in its full form, you will remove this bar and just leave the letter I. But for the time being, we will write it with the bar there to emphasize the difference between this sound and this sound. Now, this is called by the technical name that you'll see in your textbooks, apical vowel. A-P-I-C-A-L, apical. And the word apical is an adjective that comes from the noun apex. And apex means the tip of something. And it's called that because it's pronounced with the tip of the tongue resting closely behind the front teeth. Z, 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 ts, ts, s, s. Now, we'll write the letter S here as a representative of the dental sibilant row of initials. So this apical vowel can exist only in combination with a dental sibilant initial. The apical vowel cannot exist in isolation by itself. And within the entire chart of the table of finals, it only exists in this one position right here. So in a moment, when I've finished talking about this, I will have no need to come back and say anything more about that again. Once more, pronounce this z, ts, s. And of course, of those three initials, the one that I've written here as a representative of the whole row is s, s, s. Next, we have the so-called retroflex vowel. And this is, in some ways, very similar to the one that I've just discussed. The retroflex vowel is a vocalized extension of the retroflex initials, and it's formed simply by placing the tongue in the position to pronounce a retroflex initial and keeping it exactly in that position, then rumbling the vocal cords. The position for this syllable of the tongue position is one in which the tip is curled back and is slightly farther back than it would be in the case of the dental sibilants. So you have shir, 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 and we will write this case there. S-H-I with the subscript R here. S-H-I subscript R. So to repeat these two, s, shir, s, shir. And if you want to speak elegant, standard Mandarin with the correct pronunciation, you will be sure to distinguish carefully the pronunciation of these two syllables. It's a typical trait of Southern Mandarin that some people do not distinguish between these two syllables and confuse them. Now, I will not have to say anything more about these two sounds. Going on now to the other two, to the two proper main vowels. There are two main vowels, properly speaking. One is written by the letter A, and we pronounce it ah, ah, ah. The tongue is quite relaxed, the throat is relaxed and opened, and it's a sound that is produced by resonations deep in the back of the throat. Ah, ah. It's a relatively strong vowel and undergoes very little change in the course of combining with other syllables. The second vowel is a rather weak one. It's written by the letter E. And as you can see, it has two permutations in combination with different medials. And I'll discuss them in a moment. For the moment, I'll concentrate just on the E itself, the letter E. And in Mandarin, we pronounce this Now, this is an unfamiliar sound to many speakers of American English, and I have found that it helps some people to pronounce this letter, this sound, if you think of it as following the letters NG. In some dialects of northern Mandarin, close to Beijing, it is pronounced somewhat like this sound, which would be ng, ng. Now, we don't want you to say that sound, but if you think of NG before you begin to say this vowel, it can help you to articulate the vowel correctly, because the NG, placing your mouth in the position to say the NG will then form a chamber of the correct shape, and the E will come out naturally. Now drop the NG and you get a sound. I'll erase the NG because, of course, it really doesn't belong there in proper standard Mandarin. Now, these variant sounds of this letter I will not, for the moment, introduce to you, because I will wait until the combinations are formed, and we will take them in course. Now, the first thing to do here is to fill out the rest of this first row. And we do this by simply combining the main vowel with the endings. So we get AI and EI. AI is pronounced I, and EI is pronounced A. Now, you'll notice the quality of this sound has slightly changed. This is by itself. But as I said, E is a weak vowel, and in combination with the letter I or other letters, it's prone to change. So it becomes slightly reduced to A. Once more, I, A. Now the O here represents a variant of the sound oo. So you get ah, oo, ow, ow, ow. That's really not difficult. The letter O here is a variant of this sound. It's a variant of this letter E here. So these two O's really represent different values. So this sound is O, O, O. Once more the pair, ow, O. Going on. You have on, and be sure your tongue comes more forward of the position that's normal in English, so that it's perhaps even the tip of the tongue might be visible in front of the teeth in some cases when people are speaking very clearly with very clear articulation. On, and then on, And going on, ang is and eng is Now, on the table of finals, which has been printed and which you've seen, perhaps, there's a third one, ong, but I'm not going to write that for a moment because it's a little bit more complex, and I'll explain how it's derived in a moment. Let's review this row now of the finals, because this row is the basic row, and the others are formed by combinations from it. S. Repeat after me, please. S. Sh. Sh. A. I. A. Ow. O. An. Going on. Now, I've said that these two vowels do not occur again in the rest of the chart. They cannot occur independently of an initial. What we have then in place of them is simply the medial itself as an independent sound, as one of the 36 finals. And of course this is E, which you know already. Now we have this combining with the initials that we have, with the finals that we have already written out. I, A, E, A, Ya, Ya. Now here we have a change in the quality of the sound here of this letter E. The letter I sounds like E, and here the following sound becomes that's the isolation. That's the sound in isolation. In combination, it's yeah, yeah, ya, yeah, yeah. This sound resembles somewhat the English word Y-E-A-H, yeah, yeah, which is a colloquial version of the word Y-E-S, yeah. Now in Chinese, there is a strong tendency of the language to avoid syllables in which the same sound is used both as medial and as ending, so that the syllable I-A-I, for example, historically in the past it has been used, but the evolution of the language is toward avoiding that sound. So I'll write it there, but write a line through it to indicate that some people will say it, but many people avoid it. The following I-E-I doesn't exist, and going on we get I-A-O as E plus ow, yow, yow. And now, in this case, there is a change that occurs. This O represents the letter E, the weak vowel here, and in this combination, it's squeezed out entirely of the resulting spelling. It should be I-O-U, logically speaking, but the O gets squeezed out because this is basically a weak vowel. And this sound, and so I've written a square around this to draw your attention to that irregular spelling. And yet the irregular spelling does represent some actual fact of pronunciation, because in the first and second tones, this syllable is pronounced often with a more closed quality than in the third and fourth tones. In the first and second tones, it's likely to be you, 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 and in the third and fourth tones, yo, yo, something like that, or yo. The first tone would be as in qiu, qiu, or qiu, qiu, and in the third tone, qiu. That's a nicety of pronunciation that's observed by some purists, but many people aren't necessarily so sensitive to it. Going on, we have the combination I-A-N. Yen, yen. Now in this, under pressure from the I and the N, which surround it, the A changes the quality of its sound to become yen, yen. And you may think of it as I-E-N. But if you think of writing the syllable I-E-N, yen, yen, remember it should be I-A-N. In fact, I-E-N doesn't exist because I, combining with the E-N here, again causes the E to drop out. Yin, from un, we get yin, yin. And the E, this sound, is really inaudible there. Yin. So the sound yen, yen, if you think of writing I-E-N, just remember that spelling, I-E-N, does not exist in the table of finals. Going on, the combination yang, yang, which is no problem, and ying, and I'll write a box around ying also. Yang, ying, ying, ying. Now, going back over this row, here we have E, ya, ye, yao, you, or yo, you, or yo, yen, yin, yang, ying. The next row is the row written with the letter U as the medial. Oo. And so further combinations develop here. Wa, wa. Now, U here, in combining with the weak vowel E, causes the weak vowel to change in a way that we write with the letter O. And we pronounce that wa, wa, wa. Please practice this and be quite sure of your pronunciation of it. It's often incorrectly pronounced by American speakers. I pointed, American speakers or English-speaking students often have a tendency to pronounce this as if it had another U at the end. Whoa, whoa, and that's incorrect. Remember, we don't say whoa in Chinese. We don't say a sound that sounds like the English word W-O-E. Whoa. In fact, the later part, the end of this sound, develops in a direction toward the letter A, toward this sound. And I will write a small superscript there for the moment, just to indicate that it's whoa. It's developing in that direction at the end. Whoa. Be sure that your lips do not close back down to a oo sound at the end. We avoid any syllables in which the same medial and ending occur. U-O-U is not a possible sound. Wo. I emphasize this because the first person pronoun meaning I or me is this sound in the third tone. Wo, wo, wo. Obviously you'll be saying that quite a lot, and you don't want to go around saying whoa, whoa when you mean me. You don't want to say whoa is me in Chinese. Wo. Another high frequency word in this syllable is guo, guo in the second tone meaning country. And you'll be referring to different countries of the world, including China, America, England, and so forth. So you don't want to go around saying 中国 or 美国. It should be 国, 国. I will erase the A here because it's not properly part of the syllable. I've just wrote it there for a moment to show you the overtone of the sound as it's developing at the end of the syllable. Going on, you have U-A-I, Y, Y, Y. That's not a problem. Here the E gets lost again, and we have the syllable U-I. Way, way, way. And as above, in the row above, there's a difference in quality in the sound among some speakers between the first and second tones on the one hand and the third and fourth tones on the other hand. We. The E is squeezed out almost entirely in that case. But in the third or fourth tones, presumably because the syllable has a slightly longer duration, the E is a little bit more obvious. Way, 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 way. So it's way or way. Some younger people who don't observe the distinctions I've mentioned in this regard, such as here and here, will pronounce all four tones essentially in the same way. Way or way. Going on here then, these two don't exist because we avoid syllables where the medial and the ending are the same. So U-A-U and EU would not exist. Going on then, we have one, U-A-N, one, one, and U-N, because once more, the E drops out, being a weak vowel. One, and then one, one, one. In the first tone, one, one. In the third tone, or one. And in the fourth tone, the E is a little bit more obvious. Now, going on, you have wang, 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 and that's not difficult. Be sure you don't say wang, which is a tendency of American speakers. You want to be sure to preserve this ah quality in that letter A. Going on now, we have one final case here in which we will not here lose the E. We keep the E in this case. However, we write an alternate version of that up above as O-N-G. In other words, the U and the E in one of their most common forms are pronounced by writing the letter O. This is used when there is a real initial, such as the letter T, or the letter R, tong, tong, or rong, rong, or a number of other initials. In this case, there's always a zero initial. There is no real initial. So this case, this writing is preserved. This spelling form is preserved here for the special case where you say Wang, 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 which is a surname of a family name in Chinese. So let's then review, beginning here. Ang, ong, ong. And then the whole row here. O, wa, wa, why, way, wan, wen, wang, wong, wong. And actually sometimes this is pronounced ong as if it were written O-N-G. But we're going to keep the spelling U-E-N-G. Now, going down to the bottom row here, using this medial that we write U umlaut. Let's review once more the quality of the sound here. It's this sound, E, with rounded lips. Prepare to say this as your basic element in the U umlaut and simply round your lips as a kind of superficial alteration. E, 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 E. If you practice this pair, you can practice the motor exercise. You can practice the physical movement of the lips while keeping the tongue unchanging in its basic position. On the other hand, if you practice this pair, you'll notice that the lips don't move, but the tongue will move. O, E, O, E, O, E. And you should practice this pair and the other pair repeatedly so that you can become fluent with this movement. The medial itself is, of course, the first of the endings, the first of the finals in this row. U umlaut with A does not exist, and what we're going to find here is that the rest of these finals in this row are simply versions of the corresponding final in the I row up above. So you get U umlaut with the E here, the letter E, which I write here temporarily with a circumflex over it. So you get E, E, yeah, yeah. Now this is a very unfamiliar sound to speakers of American English, and you may well need to practice this quite a lot to get it correct. The absolutely essential element here is that in pronouncing the U umlaut, you must not drop the I element. You must not drop this element before you unround the lips. You must not drop this before you reach the next vowel. In other words, it's really just the U umlaut with the E is just a rounded version of IE. Let's say IE once more. Yeah, yeah. Now round the lips as you say that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What you must not do is end up saying a pure U before you get to that vowel. You, that is incorrect. You cannot have the sound ooh before you come to the vowel, because ooh is the sound here in this row. It must be E all the way to the end, just before the E appears. This doesn't exist. That doesn't exist. Now, like yeah, which I've just discussed, yeah, which is a difficult, unfamiliar sound for speakers of American English, the next element in this row, yan, yan, is also a complex nugget of unfamiliar sounds that will probably take you quite a lot of practice. I think the easy way to success in this is simply thinking of it as I-A-N with rounded lips. Yan, 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 yuan, yen, yuan, yen, yuan. Practice that quite a lot. Yuan. You must not drop the I, this sound that we represent by the letter I, before the A begins. Because if you do that, then you end up with a sound like this. One. I don't want to hear one. You have to hear yuan, 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 all the way to the end. And here, once more, the E drops out, so you have U umlaut N, which is simply a rounded lips version of yin, so you get yin, yin, yin. And there are even speakers who will drop the rounding before the N, so you get yin, but I wouldn't particularly encourage you to do that. Yin, 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 yin. This one doesn't exist, and the following case doesn't really exist either, as in this form, but I have to write it here to show you something else. U umlaut ENG logically would come here. What is U umlaut? As I've said a moment ago, it's I, it's this E sound with this sound as an overtone. It's the medial E with the part of the medial U included. Now if we add on ENG, we find that the U separates out from this complex, from the U umlaut sound, and recombines with the following E to give you the letter O. So we get I-O-N-G, just as it did in this case here. U-E combined to form O. So we get I-O-N-G, and we write that in this row as if it were a combination of the medial I, which in a sense it is. It's the medial I, the E with rounded lips. And now the rounding has moved away from the E and has combined with the E that follows it. So you get the sound yong, yong, yong. And we're going to just write across through this all because it's not even present on your chart in that form. I won't erase it because I want you to know that this is where that really came from, logically speaking. Let's review this row now. This is a very, I don't want to say difficult because I don't want to scare you off, but it's a row that takes practice. It's full of unfamiliar sounds, and it's very important that you practice this thoroughly to get it correct. E, E, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yuan, yuan, yin, yin, yin. Now, you'll find that we've now written out the 36, or if you include this case, 37 finals here in this chart. And this is the entire chart of the table of finals within these borders. Very likely you'll be required to memorize this, to write it out from memory at some point in this course. And even if you're not required to do so, you should learn it so thoroughly that you could do that. Now, one more word about this U umlaut row of finals. This combines only with two types of initials. Its use in combination with initials is quite limited. The first type is palatals. The J, the Q, and the X. Ji, qi, xi, ju, chu, xu. And that's the first type. The second type is the letters L and N. The letters L and N, the so-called voiced continuants. Now, because the palatal initials, the J, the Q, and the X, combine only with the I row of finals and the U umlaut row of finals, therefore, we can, normally speaking, when a palatal initial precedes this row of finals, we can drop the two dots. For example, and you will know by the presence of this J that the quality of this letter, U, has to be the U umlaut quality. And it cannot be this quality of the pure, what I call the pure U sound. A corresponding sound here might be written with the letters ZH. Zhu, 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 retroflex here. Zhu, now that is a pure U. Ju, ju is a U umlaut sound, but written with only the letter U. The two dots are dropped. And you know from the difference in the initial that the quality of the vowel must be different. There's one other change I want to point out, and that concerns UO here. When it follows a labial initial, bo, po, mo, or for, the U is dropped because there is a natural sound of U present in the labial initials. Bo is B-O, po, P-O, and so forth. Now, let's read these once more downward to emphasize the logical relationships of sound that exist in that dimension. S, sh, I, U, Ü. Please pronounce these after me. I, U, Ü. A, Ya, Wa, Ye, Wo, Ye. Once more. Ye, Wo, Ye. I won't pronounce that one. Y, A, Wei, or we, Ao, Yao, O, You, or Yo, An, Yen, Wan, Yuan. Once more. An, Yen, Wan, Yuan, En, Yin, Wen, Yun. Once more. En, Yin, Wen, Yun, Ang, Yang, Wang, Eng, Ying, Wang, or Ong, and Ong, Yong. This is the end of this videotape presentation on finals in the sound structure of modern Chinese. Thank you and good luck in your further study and practice.